If you don't feel that it's important to build a reputation, okay. I mean, some companies really don't need it, I guess. But what I have noticed is that it's more about the individual.
The Industrial Growth Institute podcast connects you with the big thinkers, makers, and subject matter experts across all aspects of an integrated B2B industrial revenue growth function. From strategy, board oversight, and transactions, through all the phases of manufacturing marketing, the complexities of industrial sales, and the nuances of marketing and sales technology and customer experience, I speak with guests who bring insights, innovative perspectives, best practices, and twists on traditional approaches. Each episode explores high-level thinking and in-the-weeds actionable tactics. If you enjoyed these discussions, then please help me out by liking and sharing the podcast, and especially by leaving a comment and giving a review. So with no further ado, let's jump into this episode. Hello, I'm Ed Marsh, and I appreciate you joining Jake Meth and I today for this episode of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. This is going to be a fascinating conversation, but it's also, I'll tell you up front, it's going to be a hard one for me. Jake is an editor, and he's very precise in his speech and language, and I'm sure that I'm going to conflate some terms that I know I have in conversation with him in the past, like opinion writing and PR. So he's going to have to correct me, and I apologize in advance. I ask him to be gentle, but I think it's going to really put a fine point on some really interesting topics for listeners. In addition to being the proud dad of his first child born in early October, Jake is a fellow Blue Jay. He's a graduate of Johns Hopkins University, and he's a former journalist. He became a journalist when he took his international studies degree and moved to Egypt to work for a local newspaper just in time for the Arab Spring. Perfect timing there. That was followed by work in New York and media relations for Foreign Affairs magazine and with the Council on Foreign Relations. Importantly, he spent 5 years as an opinion editor at Fortune magazine, and he won the 2020 New York Press Club Award for Excellence in Journalism for his investigation into the epidemic of laundry pod poisoning among children. You probably remember hearing about that some years ago. But then, I guess, probably bored to tears by 5 years of just one crappy opinion pitch after another, he jumped into entrepreneurship and founded his business called Opinioned because he wanted to make thought leadership better. And I think, that's certainly a goal with which we're all aligned. So now he leverages his skills to help leaders unearth their most valuable insights and publish them as op-eds and posts on social media platforms like LinkedIn. So we're going to take a dive today into thought leadership, what it takes to be interesting, how you say something meaningful to, the audience, not just to yourself. And if you hear something that catches your interest, by all means, please be sure to drop a comment, like the episode, share the episode. And if you haven't, by all means, please subscribe. So welcome, Jake. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Ed. Ed, that's a great intro. You're really good at that. So I might copy
that's nice of you to say.
Yeah, purpose.
All right. So we got to start with the important questions first. Are you getting any sleep yet?
Yeah, getting there. We are trying some methods of getting him to sleep consistently. So we're getting there, but it's all
trying some methods sounds
out.
Like it means you're not quite there yet.
No, not completely, but it's all balanced out by just how great it is. So I'm good.
That's neat. All right, so you went from international relations to journalism, and obviously with Foreign Affairs magazine, with the Council of Foreign Relations, with your activity in Egypt, you found something at the intersection, but there was a jump somewhere that happened from international relations to journalism. What triggered that?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to say that there was some sort of grand plan, but there wasn't. I think it can be easy to look back on like a career trajectory and be like, okay, this led to that. When I was in college, was just more interested I was really interested in the world. I wanted to learn about the world. Growing up as a coming of age in 9/11, I was very interested in the Middle East and sort of what was going on that caused so many people to hate us. And so there was a lot of interest in that region. And so I studied that in college, and that kind of spurred me to try to go there and work there. And at the same time, when I was in college, I did a research project that allowed me to do some interviewing of a couple of experts in Israel for a paper I was working on that was related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And in the course of doing that, I got my first real taste of journalism, because it was not just going through books and reading about the history, but it was also incorporating interviews and current things into the work I was doing. And so I think that is what got me interested in this idea of forming a career out of that. And so it seemed logical for me then to try to travel to the region and work there as a journalist. But I will say, though, that since then, my interests have changed. I, just as with anyone, going through your 20s and into your 30s, like, you don't always have the same interest in the same things. And so ending up where I am today, I can't really say exactly how it got there, but it was more, I've tried my best to follow what was most compelling to me at the moment and just go with that.
So Arab Spring sounds kind of scary. I'm sure often when we view things from afar in the evening news, they seem more turbulent than they are. There's perhaps a small pocket of it, whereas otherwise things may be relatively stable. But was it pretty wild being there for that?
Yeah, I would say the way you described it at the end there was more accurate. There were definitely moments where there were a lot of street protests going on. There was fighting between the police and whether that was sort of ideologically driven protesters, sometimes just people trying to make a big fuss and throw rocks at police. Like it kind of varied, but those things did flare up. It was always your choice as to whether you wanted to get involved. And generally I didn't. If you're in a place for 2 years, it's kind of hard to always be going out and getting into crazy situations. I did a couple of times, and I think I learned in the course of that I was not a war journalist. I didn't enjoy being tear gassed, and I didn't enjoy hearing gunshots. That, like, I really do think some people get off on that and or enjoy being in those situations. It just wasn't for me. Right. So generally it was normal life, but yes, there were situations where that would happen. I think that the part that maybe was even more difficult, though, is just kind of living in a country where there's a lot of suspicion around foreigners, especially at that time. And I ended up getting sort of accidentally arrested twice, which were both situations where I didn't do anything that sort of prompted it, other than I just happened to be in the wrong place, wrong time. And so I say that would be the more difficult part, but it also gives you a perspective on what people deal with when they come here, on the flip side, right? Which is that, when people immigrate to the US and sometimes, especially I think now, are viewed with suspicion, that can be difficult as well. And I think it helps me understand and have more sympathy for that.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work over the years with German companies and German capital equipment companies. And the principal of one of those companies was coming to the U.S. one time, and in between his last visit, I think he had submitted biometrics or something. And in between his last visit and this visit that I'm talking about, he lost the tip of his finger in a machinery accident. So he came back, and of course the biometrics didn't match up because he didn't have the tip of his finger anymore. And I think he ended up getting 4 hours of interrogation or something. There's important processes in place, but you're right. There is a difference. I mean, culturally, you kind of understand one context and not another. Were you doing journalism in English or local language?
Yeah, it was in English. There was it's still around in a different form. There's a periodical called Mada Masr. That's what it's called today. But back then it was the English edition of one of the major Egyptian newspapers, Al Masri Al Yom. And then briefly it was called Egypt Independent. There were a lot of changes going on at the time because the journalism scene there was very inchoate, just due to the fact that it had been largely regime controlled up until that point. And so this English edition of the paper, I was working for that. And we definitely had a little more freedom with our reporting because the authority, and I think this continues today, the authorities were a little less concerned about what was being written in English because majority of Egyptians weren't reading in English, and so they had it had less of an impact on what was going on in the country, but it definitely did help inform internationally what was happening there. So it felt like it was important work.
All right. Obviously, we're coming out of an election season here in the U.S., and we've heard a lot about journalism and bias and media and traditional media and established media and, user created content. I mean, massive, massive changes. It seems like you had really perfect timing when you made your leap from traditional media over into this new model that you have for this new business that you've started.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a narrative right now that is very prevalent that you can bypass traditional media. And I definitely do not think that it's true. I think that as a whole, I forget, I think it may have been Jim Vandehey was recently talking about this sort of fallacy that, you could just go on LinkedIn and form your own following and just completely ignore all traditional media channels. I mean, you could do it, but I think it's not the most effective way to get your voice out there. For me, the way I looked at it was I was starting to get more interested in entrepreneurship and just kind of forging my own path because I didn't find that I enjoyed really working for an organization. The last place I worked was at Fortune, and and I think this would go with for anywhere I work. I just didn't always agree with the way they were doing things, and I wanted to do things my own way. And so what I tried to think about was, well, what's the best way that I can help people based on my experience and doing it in a way that's new, because that felt more interesting and fun to me. And so, yes, I left traditional media, but at least in terms of the fact that I'm now working with clients, I'm not writing novel stories on things that are going on, but I liked the idea of working still within traditional media in the actual work that I do, because I understand that space, and in a way that I think most people don't know how to help clients get themselves in there, and I know what they're doing wrong in most cases, and so I think I the most with that.
And how often do you disagree with your boss these days?
I mean, I know you're kidding, but all the time. I mean, there's so much of
I'm only half joking. I mean, you have to make choices.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much questioning of like, what's the right way to do it? There's no blueprint for this because it's not PR. It's more about how do I help people from a journalistic perspective, and I don't really know of anyone who's approaching it purely in that way. I mean, there are a lot of agencies who will tell you, yes, this is we're going to do the best thing for you to get you covered by journalists, but that's not, in most cases, that's not actually what's happening.
Right. All right. So today, I think what you call yourself a fractional editor-in-chief, and your work is really about helping internal teams understand kind of the art and the science of creating content and working, I guess, with their own internal comm staff, sometimes with agencies, with writers, with executives. So fill in the pieces around what this current iteration of your model looks like.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea, right? Is to be in some ways like an ombudsman for the organization, right? So most organizations, companies understand that if they want to increase the reach and depth of their content and to reach more audiences and build their reputation, they have to have some form of communications. And usually that's handled by PR agencies. And so the idea here is not to replace that, because in a lot of cases, these agencies serve a lot of important functions. They have a lot of good connections with journalists. They know which outlets for you to be in. They know which conferences for you to go to. They know what sounds good and how to position you in a strategic way. All of those things are great. The difference here is that, I would say the difference here is that they're working for you, right? Like they are your client, and you are their client, and they have to do what you say, no matter what, right? And I've seen this a million times. I saw this as an editor, and this was a little bit of the impetus. Part of the impetus for starting my own business was agencies sending me content from their principals that was not good, and they knew it. But the problem is that they were either unwilling or unable to go back to the principal and say, this isn't great. And maybe in some cases they would say, yeah, I don't know, but we'll try. Or why don't we try to go another direction and make it a little better? But there was never anyone saying, look, we need to completely reorient this, or even just no, this isn't going to work. Right. and stand firm there and not get blown over by the blowback from that.
Right.
And again, I understand, right? They're paying your bills, but there's a cost to that, right? Which is that if you're going out and you're trying to get things placed, not just op-eds, but also writing things on social media and speaking at conferences, and you just have yes, 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 eventually you might come to regret the fact that you're not really building something powerful and unique, right, and lasting. And so the idea here is to go in and really be that voice that no matter what, we're coming in with honesty. And if you don't like it, that's okay, because that's our job. Our job is to be that outside voice that helps you make what you're putting out there better, helps you plumb the depths of your knowledge so that you can come out with more interesting things that you don't even maybe know are so interesting. This is sort of the conceit of the business.
You said honesty. How do you, if we look at honesty and authenticity is a word I hear used more often around content. Do you see those as synonymous, or do you distinguish between them?
Well, I think it depends on what if we're talking about like those two words, yeah, they have different meanings. I guess it just depends on which context we're talking about it in. Like, maybe you could give me like a scenario where you would.
Well, I think that, part of what we're going to dig into more as we talk is just vomiting up corporate speak versus kind of bringing personality and sometimes even a controversial perspective to a topic, right, that will engage people and help them challenge their own thinking. And so that set of circumstances I often hear referred to in the content creation world as authenticity. And I'm wondering if essentially that's what you're driving at, or if you're very specifically using the word honesty and that you see companies often misrepresent what they do as opposed to just vomit up a vanilla version of it.
I see. So maybe I didn't explain it great. I think what I meant by honesty in what I was saying before is that I think that they need honesty from their vendor, like from me.
Got it.
Right.
Makes sense.
Right. I will say though, on the whole authenticity thing, that's a big buzzword. I'm sure you've seen it a lot. And it just as in anything, it's easy to say like that's the key, but it just depends. I mean, obviously you want to come across to people as authentic in your communications. You want to seem like you're being, I guess, genuine is another word to use, right? Like the real you. I do agree that that's very important, but I think that often that word gets applied in situations that I think it often gets applied to mean, like, for instance, it can often be applied to mean like, just talk about your personal life a lot. And I think that there's no easy rule with that. Like, I see sometimes people on social media just posting about their personal life and really, right, going strong on that. And at a certain point, it's like, yeah, you want to see who this person is, but if they're not offering you anything of value from like their specific point of expertise, well, this isn't a journal, right? It's not
Right.
what the point of it is, right? So I think that there's limits to all these things.
Yeah, I've got an example. I think I'm going to read a quote from you in a little bit. That's you offer on LinkedIn some fairly cutting commentary of some of the material you see out there. I mean, brutally honest, you might say, kind of bringing perhaps your Jersey perspective to it.
Yeah.
What size companies do you typically work with? I mean, are these larger organizations that have their internal comms or writing teams, or do you work with smaller businesses as well?
Yeah, I mean, most of the clients I've worked with since, I mean, I like to, speaking of honesty, I like to be very upfront about my situation, right? Which is that there's a one person business right now and I am building it. And it's still relatively new. And I started it basically because I wanted to leave my last company quickly. So this is all learning experience, and I'm not, I don't claim to have some sort of huge business success here, right? So, but I think I'm going to get there. It's just a matter of how it pans out, and how I execute it. But I will say, like, of who I've worked with mostly, it's been smaller to mid-size enterprises who are kind of more eager to get their names out there. But I will say that part of that has been just the networks that I've had most access to. I actually think that my services can be quite valuable to larger enterprises too. But the limit there again is kind of the access, but also the willingness, because in a lot of those cases, when you're bigger, you're a little less willing to break any eggs because there's not that much in it for you, unless you have some incentive to be like, okay, I need to build my profile because I want to break through in some sort of way with my business, or I want to build a reputation for myself. And that is becoming more, that's becoming more common now, to see larger executives want to build their own reputation just because they see the value of it, not just in their own company, but for their career, even beyond that company. But still, there's definitely a hesitation there.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk aversion for sure. Are there particular industries that you have found a niche in thus far, or that you're targeting?
No, I mean, the only thing I would say is what hasn't really been very present. I mean, one would be probably sort of your space. I mean, I've generally, I don't think you see a lot of people in sort of the manufacturing space be really as interested as maybe someone, for example, building an app, right, about that's intended to help with some kind of social issue. They're going to be much more attuned to their reputation and building themselves up in that world. So I would say the more traditional industries, the more physical industries, you'll see less interest. But again, never to say that it's not relevant. I mean, definitely like
I mean, I would say that means there's potentially greater opportunity. And, often I think it's that they don't believe that other people are interested, and maybe they don't have somebody to help craft an interesting perspective that will get engagement. But I mean, I think about the machinery companies I work with that, for instance, use plastic in packaging. And there's such a big sustainability topic going on right now. They could definitely be talking about it. Companies that are doing robotics and automation, there's so many questions around trade policy and around employment status and around questions of quality and resurgence of American manufacturing. There's lots of positions that these companies could take if they had somebody kind of helping them form, I guess, the argument in a way that would be engaging outside.
Yeah, I mean, my perspective is that anyone at sort of any kind of executive level has something interesting to say. It's just a matter of whether they're willing to say it and how able they are to let that out. Because when you're in your professional life, you have a sort of sequence that you follow. There's a way that you go into your working world, and you kind of, you kind of limit out anything that seems like it's not supposed to be relevant to that. And so unlocking that is difficult. And that's why I think it's helpful to have someone like me to do that, but more not just to be self-promotional about it, but I think it's just the trick that often they're running into is this assumption, like you said, that there's not much to be shared. But I will say, like, when I was editing Fortune, some of the most interesting pieces we worked on were from people you would never expect, not the people working on some app that's solving some social problem or changing the world, but someone who knew one thing really, and this is kind of the essence of a good op-ed, right? It's like, one thing really, really well that almost no one else knows. And if you could find a way to talk about that in a way that a broader swath of people could understand, you've kind of hit the goal line.
So it sounds like you're almost as much executive coach as you are editor.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of thought about framing it that way, but I think I'm a little resistant to that, only because I think coaching comes along with this idea that it's about making you able to do something. Like, it's about, I guess, improving your ability to do this.
Right.
I don't think partially this is because, like, what kind of business would it be if I just taught someone to do it and they could just do it on their own? Well, then what am I for? But also I don't think it's something that you could just do on your own. I think that there's a unique set of skills that comes along with, because I've thought about, how do you scale this business? Like, is there a way to, like, give people a sort of a smaller solution that's a little cheaper, but is more scalable and then more people can get it? I just don't. I think that it's something that's built into certain people, not just me, but other journalists too, who have the ability to go toe to toe with an executive and give them the truth, but also do it in a way that's helpful to them. That I don't know. And of course, AI kind of floats in here, but, like, I don't know if it's replicable, at least at this point in time.
Sure. All right. So the emphasis, or at least the original emphasis of Opinion, was op-eds, opinion pieces. You alluded earlier in the conversation and on your website, and I think a lot of your LinkedIn content, you talk more broadly about thought leadership in other disciplines, social posts like for LinkedIn, but even perhaps more broadly, say, marketing content in general. How are you defining the outer limits of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, great question. And that's one of the things I've been debating a lot as I've been sort of in baby mode recently. I had a little time to think because I'm not doing as much delivery. And I do think there's still a market for, like, a really deep dive into making an op-ed great, because those stand alone in that they need to be externally validated. Otherwise, they're unsuccessful. I mean, you could put anything on LinkedIn. No one's going to stop you. And that's definitely been proven to be true over the last couple of years. But yeah, with an op-ed, you have to get punched through. And especially if you're trying to get into the highest echelon of publications, you're just competing against so much. And so, and so there still is a desire for that. But I have realized that there's also an appetite for so much more. And I also, in looking around at the landscape, see that there definitely needs to be a lot of help in that space. And so, yeah, on the sort of limits of that, the way I'm defining it at the moment is just sort of communications and thought leadership content. So that can go. I do think that there are actually broader limits than I even assumed when I started this, right? So it's not just LinkedIn, but and not just social media, and not just a blog post on your website. It's also when you go to a conference and you're speaking on a panel, what are you saying? Like, what's your theme? Because no one just goes in blind on this, right? You have themes you want to hit on. If you have pretty milquetoast uh, cliched themes, then you're not standing out to that audience. And even press releases. I mean, press releases are sort of nowadays, even among PR practitioners, kind of maligned and mocked, but they do still serve a function, and finding a way to say something unique in them is important. And then, interviews with journalists, right? Like, what are you going in ready to say? What are you going to talk about? It's really about getting this, having a much more refined sense of what your message is, but again, making sure that that's a message that is actually worth going out with and isn't just something that's going to make you blend in with everyone else.
All right. So where do you jump in? I mean, one piece is somebody comes with an idea and you kind of pull threads here and there and you craft it in a way that it is more compelling and more unique and perhaps more controversial and will stand alone better. Another is somebody says, geez, I really like the idea of what you're talking about, but we're humble. We do our own thing. We're a traditional manufacturing company. We don't want to brag to the world. Can you start with them to even help tease out the particular expertise and insights that they could be talking about, maybe even do media training to help them be more effective in their interviews?
Well, only if they're interested. I mean,
yeah, sure, of course. I mean, they have to be willing to do it.
Yeah. Like if they're, yeah. I mean, if someone's saying like, yes, we want to be out there, but we're afraid, it's harder. I think that there's only so much of a case I can make as to why you shouldn't be so afraid. I do think companies are way more afraid than they need to be, but I also have to acknowledge my own limitations here. I'm not a lawyer. I have not worked in corporate, leadership or investor relations, right? Like these are the types of things that these companies are looking at and saying, well, it's not worth it for us to take that risk. There's not a lot I can do to convince you because you're probably already convinced. But if you do feel that there's a desire to get out there more and you're a little bit afraid, but you're willing to work through that fear, then...
Or maybe even not afraid, but just overwhelmed and kind of confused and not sure where to start, not sure how to go about it.
Sure. Well, that I definitely feel I can work with. And I think the idea there is, I mean, number one is you need to scale back your expectations. Like, honestly, like it's just publishing one op-ed does not a thought leader make. Like it's just, even if you got it in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, I mean, it might bring you in a little bit of business. Just have a client I worked with the other day on an op-ed that they already got like 3 journalist inquiries just from this one piece. That's great. But what is your long-term goal? If your goal is to be someone who everyone knows is the authority on this thing in that space, you're going to have to commit a lot of time to this and a lot of work over years. And so, again, I think that's something that's not communicated up front very well, and maybe makes me not as good of a pitch man as maybe some others are. But I'm not interested in deceiving people about the reality of the situation.
So in other words, a strategic plan with consistent tactical execution against a long-term and reasonable goal.
Yeah. And they need people like yourself for that. Like, I'm not the strategic planner, right? Like I can help execute that strategic plan, but they need to have a sense, whether that's through hiring an outside consultant or whether internally they've figured out what their goal is. Right. And then they can come to someone like me, or maybe PR can, help in that too, helping them get there.
But the point is, I think very clearly what you're saying is a periodic ad hoc approach to opinion pieces or even perhaps LinkedIn posting does not, as you said, create or constitute thought leadership.
I don't really see the point. I mean, when I think about the people that you follow in your life, whether that's in thought leadership or in something else, like whether it's like a hobby that you have, who's someone who's an expert in. what often makes me feel like this is someone who I can really sink some trust into is like consistency,
Right.
right? Is seeing this person over and over, getting a little bit of a sense of who they are as a person, right? But that's not everything, but getting a sense of who they are as a person, but consistently seeing them speak with authority, be able to trust them over time. That's what makes someone really believe in you. And I think that if you can do that consistently with opinion writing, yeah, you can really get somewhere, but you have to be committed to it.
I also like to find people whose the evolution of their thinking is something that I can follow. If they basically just have one idea and that is the essence of everything they bring to bear on the market, and they just keep hammering that for years. I mean, that's different than having, a clear goal that you want to work on consistently. On the other hand, situations and circumstances and technology and buyer behaviors and our expectations and the media environment, all those things are always changing. And if you're saying the same thing now that you were saying 5 years ago, feels like, that's probably compromising your credibility.
Absolutely. I think it's you need to have a theme, but it can't just be, here's my one thing and this is,
Right.
I think one example of this, because I'm a new parent, I've been reading a lot about this, and there's this woman, she's I think she's an economist. I think she's like a social economist. I forget exactly how she describes it, but her name is Emily Oster. I don't know if you ever heard of her.
I have not.
And she writes a lot about evidence when it comes to things with both pregnancy and with parenting, right?
Okay.
And there's not one thing that she goes out. It's not like the parenting method, it's not like, oh, you got to do this with your kids and this. No, it's just she has a theme, which is I'm going to apply data, but really look at the data, not just like random studies, but I'm actually going to look at the studies, and I'm going to show you what is real and what is wrong, not, and then you could form your own opinion on what you want to do. And that's a theme. And so when I come back to her, I trust her. No matter what
Right.
her take is, I trust her take, because she's not trying to sell me something on one specific thing, but she has established herself as an authority. And then the other day, actually, I think like a week or two ago, she published an op-ed in the New York Times about RFK Jr. Nomination for health secretary, about his views on vaccines and some other things. She's not writing op-eds all the time, but when she sees that moment where, oh, this is an intersection of my expertise with public interest, she
Right.
jumps in.
Got it. All right, so let's go back to the changes in the media world, because they set the context for a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. My sense is, if you boil it down, there's two things that happen. First is the democratization of the ability to publish and broadcast that technology has created. The second is this growing awareness of bias. Regardless of where one stands on a political spectrum or any particular topic, I'd say there's a hypersensitivity to bias in the information that's fed to us, and we're much more aware of the fact that information that we took as factual and straightforward is presented through a lens or perspective in many cases. Do you agree that those are kind of the two things that have changed, or am I looking at it the wrong way? Do you think something else is impacting it?
I agree with you on the democratization. I mean, I think it's kind of hard to deny that information is coming from more places, and yeah, I mean, that's just what's happening, right? Like there's no longer some sort of stranglehold on information dissemination with a couple of news networks and major newspapers, or if or before the internet, right? Just there were more local papers, but those papers controlled the information in that area because you didn't have access or interest in things that are going on outside of that area, right? So that's definitely true, and that's changed the landscape immensely. Yeah, and it changes from the perspective of a business owner, right? It changes your reach. It changes, the geography of your clientele. it also changes your competition, right? Because now you have way more to compete with, right? So absolutely true. Bias, you and I could probably go for like 2 hours on this. And I remember we actually talked about this another time. I think bias is trickier because I think that I definitely think nowadays where there is bias, it's a little more obvious, like even within traditional media. And definitely when it comes to more social media or more alt media, like alt magazines and alt newspapers, that yes, they're more open about their opinion on something. And in some sense, in some ways it's good because it's a little more honest about where they're coming from. But has it changed so much? It's harder to say, because if you look back at the days where, again, there were fewer media outlets, you could say, well, yeah, but that was biased toward a more establishment view of things, but it wasn't
Yeah,
so
maybe
overt,
the
right?
degree of bias hasn't changed, but our sensitivity to it has.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know, because how can I say what sensitivity to bias used to be back in the day? I don't know.
Right.
I do think there is more, again, because of the technological advancement. There's more. It's louder. The reaction to that bias and just look at the situation with the United Healthcare CEO's killing. I mean, just the fact that it not only was just the story about how horrible the killing was, and it wasn't just a story about the issues within the healthcare industry and the health insurance industry, but there was a third story about, wow, what an interesting reaction among people. And where did that story come from? Reddit, X, LinkedIn, private conversations in people's group chats that came out more publicly. Like, those things became their own media story. And
Right.
the awareness of that by traditional media, right? This is being covered, that the things like that are being covered by traditional media outlets. That's a whole new thing, because like you're saying, there are way more forums for these discussions to be happening. There's way more connection between people in different geographies. And so the number of ideas that are out there are stronger. It's also going on with the drones in New Jersey, right? There's so much speculation going on right now. And a lot of that's driven by this democratization. So it's hard to say like what it all means, or I'm sure there are people who are looking at this and have a better, like a more well-formed opinion on what it all means. But I think you have to contend with the fact that I think what makes it relevant to this discussion right here is that you're competing in a marketplace of ideas that is full of all different takes. And the difficult thing is, how do you get out there with a take that's unique, but also not stupid? Because there are a lot of people with very unique takes, but they're stupid. Sorry, but right. So how do you do that? You have to get really, really, really into like, what do you offer that no one else does? And what do you understand that no one else does? And you have to explain it with nuance. And that's really difficult to do.
All right. Well, let me try to connect another thread to my point on bias, and maybe I'm imagining it, or maybe we just see it differently, or maybe I see it, or imagine it, and you're looking at it more clearly. But in any event, I think there's a connection in the industrial sales and marketing world where it used to be companies would say, we're best in class, we're world class, we've got the best or whatever. And people would, they would kind of discount a little bit, but they would say, okay, well, there's probably some foundation for saying it. Whereas now I think there's a lot more skepticism that I would say is founded in that hypersensitivity to bias. And so when you hear one company's website, or you read one company's website, and you could basically cut and paste the text from one to another, or you have a series of meetings with industrial sales reps, and they're essentially saying the same thing one after another. Companies, I think, not only fail to differentiate themselves, but probably jeopardize their credibility because people are looking at it now and saying, come on, I was born tonight, but not last night. Why do you expect me to believe that about you?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that makes sense, right? I mean, if you were looking at a company, I'm trying to put myself in that space, right? So if you're looking at a company that you want to do work for you and they were the only option, or there were very few options in that space, and you didn't have Google, I could see it being, you could just look at what their website said, or not their website, but like what they were telling you and say, okay, well, I guess, I mean, it's kind of like almost like the paradox of choice, right? It's like now, even if I go to the doctor and they prescribe something to me or they diagnose me, I go on Reddit and I'm like, well, what does everyone else think? And sometimes that's not great because now I'm like, I got 20 different things to think about, right? So I
Right.
think that you're right, though, that if they're competing with others and everyone's saying the same thing, then how does someone distinguish when they can easily look at the pitches of all the others? And then you have disruptors who probably offer different ways of doing things, right, at a smaller scale. So I do think this does come back to telling this story in a way that's unique, and being sensitive to the fact that you can't just go out there and just say the same thing over and over because it's easier. I don't think people are smarter now, but I think it's easier for people to do a little more research and find out what else is out there.
So if companies have this opportunity to leverage media, basically they could now be their own version of one of the major three networks from 30 or 40 years ago, just by having a YouTube channel, essentially. If that option is available to them, what have you seen companies do to really use that effectively? Have you seen companies essentially set up their own publishing department in-house across different media and channels, or are they just kind of failing to seize the opportunity that may be there for them?
Well, I mean, like I was saying earlier, like I don't think they do have the ability to set up their own version of the traditional networks. I think that it can play a big part in creating their own story, but I don't think they can completely. I mean, think about, like, I'm trying to think of an example, like, I guess you could think about like OpenAI, right? That Sam Altman has very much built a profile for himself on social media and has the ability to speak directly to his audiences, and doesn't really need traditional media. But that said, he still participates and works with traditional media. Actually, when I was an editor at Fortune, this is way before anyone knew who OpenAI was, including me. They sent me op-eds, and we published op-eds by, I think they were written by him, or I don't remember exactly, but about AI. They were working with traditional media even as they were building their own ecosystem. So, and I think you see the same thing with like Elon Musk, right? I mean, this has been maybe even the most hypercharged case of that, right? Someone who basically owns his own social media platform now, but he's still not completely divorced from the importance of coverage in traditional media, and traditional media still plays a role. All that is to say, though, yes, those avenues are way more available outside of traditional media. And I think that if a company wants to build a strong brand, yeah, they should be investing in that strongly. And but if they think that, I think that the mistake that many are making is they're just thinking, well, we're going to set up our own newsroom, we're going to tell our own story, and we're going to be like journalists, but they're not. And if the content doesn't resonate, content doesn't resonate. Right. There's nothing that, no matter how much money, I mean, it's almost like advertising, right? Like, same thing. Like, you could spend as much money as you want, but if it sucks, like, no one's gonna be interested.
Let's talk about opinion versus fact. Too often, we state the former as the latter. Companies do it all the time. They may do it with pure intention. They may believe what they're saying, but it costs them, I believe it costs them credibility. What do you think is a consequence for a business conflating opinion and fact?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are situations where like it can be a little bit in between, in the sense that let's say, for example, like a company that cites a study that is a real study that's been done, but it doesn't either there's something wrong with the study, or maybe it doesn't apply exactly to that situation, but they make it sound like it does.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not really opinion, but it's also not really fact, because they're kind of manipulating, right? So I think that I don't have a more unique take than, don't lie. I mean, if you're going to go out there and lie, it probably will catch up with you eventually. It's caught up. We've seen it catch up with a lot of companies in the past, and it's a reputational risk. So I think that, but I wouldn't frame a dichotomy as like opinion versus fact, because I don't think opinion is the flip. I think the flip side of fact is a lie, right? I think opinion is just on a different scale, right? And I think the idea should be to meld the two. Go out there, have an opinion, and ground your opinion in fact. That's the way to do it. And that way you can build authority, but you also can distinguish yourself.
Shifting gears a little bit, I know at least before you were a new dad, you found some outlet for your business stress in improv and hiking and some other activities. Do you still have any time for that?
Not right now. Definitely with improv, that kind of fell by the wayside. But I hope to get back to it soon. Yeah, getting outside. I mean, I'm so like addicted to the computer and the phone. And it's funny because I think before I go on like a hike or even a long walk, right, in the neighborhood, like I'll think like, well, this isn't productive. But what invariably happens is when I go on that walk or hike, I have like huge creative, maybe not every time, but often I like really open up creatively, and it like helps me solve problems that I can't figure out when I'm sitting in front of a computer. So, for anyone who's ever thinking like, oh, this isn't a good use of time, it's both enjoyable, but it also is like really good for your professional life too, I think.
And do you take your phone so you can capture the ideas, the brainstorms that you have, or do you remember them long enough until you get home and write them down?
Yeah. I paradoxically think that the Apple Watch or any other sort of device like that is great for those situations, because I do like to capture things on like a voice note, and you can do that on the Apple Watch, but you can't. Yeah, I mean, you could also bring your phone, but then you have to bring your phone, right? So it's nice to have something very lightweight, where if you do have a good idea, you can just record it.
That's a great idea. I've never thought about using the watch that way.
Yeah, I like it. I like take like a voice note or a voice memo. And it's really, like I love just going out without my phone. It's really nice.
And how about your chess habit?
Is that? Oh man, I forgot what's even on my bio. Chess is a cruel mistress. I mean, I like to play online sometimes and have people tell me I suck. I just get like a sort of perverse enjoyment out of it, but. I mean, I just like, sometimes it's just nice to just like really get your brain into something and just zero everything else out. But I'm looking forward to teaching my son when he's old enough. Yeah.
Oh, fun. Nice.
So he can also, if he learns from me, he'll also be able to go online and get beaten by 14-year-olds and be told that he sucks.
Well, but I tell you what else will happen is when he's 11 years old, he's going to revel in telling his dad that his dad sucks too.
Yeah, that's probably, I'm not ready for it yet, but I should be.
Right. So pretty bold move to take your entrepreneurial leap when you were planning on growing a family. Many people would have hesitated, but I guess it was driven by an intense urge to leave the other business or this need to create something. Which was the stronger impetus?
Yeah, I honestly really would say is both. Like, I really didn't want to be, I think I realized I just don't work great in organizations. And part of that is what leads into what I do now, which is like, I'm very honest and I'm nice. Like, I'm not like a jerk. Like, I don't like insult people or whatever, but I'm very honest. And I think that generally when I work within a place, that honesty, people sometimes like it up to a point, and then they're like, yeah, this is bothering us. But like, as a third party, I think it's very useful because they only have to deal with me a little bit, and I'm not, in house, and I can be fully honest with that because if they don't like it, okay, then I lost a client, but my whole life is not over. So it lends itself, or my whole, not life, but like my income, right? So I think it lends itself nicely to what I like. And what I really want to do with this business is build it out so that more journalists can do this, because I think a lot of journalists are kind of unhappy with that career path. It doesn't pay, all the typical stuff. It doesn't pay well. It's unstable. The industry's dying. We all know this. Like, I'm not saying anything new, but there's not a lot of great routes other than PR. And PR is a fine route for a career, but I think it also would be cool for journalists to have an alternate route that they can go into where they can maintain a lot of the same journalistic instincts. Because I think a lot of journalists get frustrated when they go into PR because they have to kind of go back into or they have to go into company line mode. But if they can have this way of working with people that's less built into the client and more built into the idea and to the intellectual honesty, my hope is that this could be good work for journalists.
All right, I want to pull hard on that journalism thread here in a second, but first, I mentioned at the beginning that I made a mistake in one of our conversations about calling what you do PR, and you corrected me and talked about how you work side by side with agencies in many cases, and you've kind of expanded on that as we've been talking. But can you, for those of us who are ignorant of the space, give us just a quick definition of, difference between marketing, PR, communications, and opinion?
Well, I would say, and by the third one, you mean like what I'm doing? You said marketing, PR, and opinion.
Communications and opinion.
Right. But you're saying, what are you asking me to distinguish what you said, those things, and what my approach is?
Well, it feels to me like you're covering a continuum across several of those. What you're doing doesn't fit a traditional definition.
Right. I agree. I mean, I'm not trying to make myself too complicated here, but I think I'm just complicated. No, but I think I'm really not the best person to define these things. So I don't want to marketing is generally going to be, right? Like, how do you tell a good story about your product, right? PR is going to be more about sort of accessing the journalism world and telling your stories through those venues, right? And then I think there's the sort of opinion or more journalistic approach, which is, but that approach works very much hand in hand with PR, which is why what I think the best way to explain it is, it's not to say that what I'm doing doesn't have a relationship with PR where we work in tandem to achieve a goal of improving the client's reputation. And the same would go for marketing too. The reason I make the distinction is to say that what I'm doing is not PR, as it's not the same function. Like, when you hire me, you're not hiring for the same types of activities that you would get from a PR firm. So that's all I mean by it. As to the distinctions, it's a little bit of a harder thing to really pin down, All
right, so you get a mulligan on that one. This next one, I want a solid answer from you, and because this is something that I've thought about for a long time. So, in the industrial manufacturing space, I find that most companies struggle to create content. There's resistance, there's mindset, there's writer's block. There's fear of cameras. They don't want to sit down and write. They think they have nothing important to say. They think nobody's interested in it. They think everyone knows their world as well as they do. They've kind of got this myopic perspective. I've often suggested that what they really need to do is go and add a young journalist to their team. I mean, they've got executives that are subject matter experts. They've got customers that are experts. They've got industry experts that are adjacent to them. There's so many people that they could interview. And so it seems like a well-trained journalist that knows how to interview, knows how to research, knows how to pull ideas together into a story could help them over that hurdle and really help them build a content engine. Do you agree, or am I nuts?
No, I think it's a great idea. I think that in a perfect world, that'd be great. The reality, though, is that it's difficult to actually for that to happen for a number of reasons. I mean, first is
Why?
The first thing they're going to do is, if you say something like that, is they're going to go to a PR firm, because that's like when any company thinks like, okay, I need to like work on our communications. Either it's like we hire like a content agency if it's about marketing on their, content marketing, or we go to a PR firm if we want to be, or both, right? And there's some firms that do both, right? But so getting specific, right? So they're going to what the sort of tried and true method is, which is understandable because that's like what they understand, and they don't know beyond that world. Now, if they wanted to go hire a journalist, I think that's great, but they don't have the internal know-how of even how to go about that. I mean, how do they even know?
All right, so give us some tips then. How would they do that?
I'm trying to think of how to answer this without being self-promotional. I don't think it's practical, because I just think about like if I needed to hire like a tech person. Well, when I'm interviewing them, I have no idea if they're giving me the right answers because I don't know tech, right? So sure and the other thing is, the other reason that this is unrealistic is because journalists are not interviewing for those types of jobs as an in-house journalist. It's not a thing that comes to mind for journalists. Oh, right. It's I'll go work at a PR agency, which then I can kind of do that work. So then, again, this is why I like, the idea of building up what I'm doing is valuable, because then they can go to me and either me or I can pair them with someone who can actually do that job. But I can be that sort of trusted place that they go to know, okay, well, like, he's been well recommended. We know that he's going to do a good job, and it's like, it's not like we're taking our car to some random mechanic who hasn't been right. recommended, and we have no idea what he's doing to the car, right?
So maybe there's a recruiting and placement aspect of your model that you could develop as well. Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of what I'm working on, at least in my mind right now. And again, nothing has been really executed yet because of personal reasons and all that stuff. But yeah, this is the idea, is to have a business like this that could be really valuable for those companies.
So if somebody wants to shape their understanding of thought leadership content the way you look at it, obviously I'd refer them to the section on your website, kind of interestingly called Op Education, where you've got articles on, I love the article, How to Write an Op-Ed That Doesn't Suck. And then your Pitches to Stitches newsletter that they can subscribe to, I guess, is that on LinkedIn or Medium, or where
Substack.
Is it? Substack, okay.
Yeah.
But what books or blogs or podcasts or social accounts beside your own would you suggest to them? Are there resources that you think are good?
I think that there's two things here. First is that there are things that you can do, just to kind of preface it, right? There are definitely things that you can do to get better at this. But as with anything, and this isn't just me, but it could be someone who's well-trained in PR, having an expert work with you, if you really want to get, it's like going to the doctor, right? Like, you could read as much as you want online, but there's also, if you want to take it to the next level, you probably need someone to help you.
Yeah, you made it clear earlier, I think, that you don't see it as a DIY kind of activity. On the other hand, I'm thinking just to help people prep their understanding to be ready for a conversation with you, for instance.
Sure. Right. So that's why I say like that's if you're really trying to go next level, right? If you're just trying to get to like a basic understanding, there's not I don't have a special answer other than just you need to just consume a lot. I mean, you need to just
Okay.
I joke to those people like I'm like the op-ed chat GPT because it's like I've read so many op-eds,
Right.
I've just so much data that I can automatically know if something's good. That's not because I'm
Right.
smarter than anyone. It's because I've had so much input. And
Tacit
so
knowledge.
yeah. So it's just, you have to get out there and read a lot of newspapers. You have to read a lot of opinion sections. You need to read a lot of social media posts. And over time, you're going to kind of sort of get a sense of like what's good. You'll see what people are reacting to, because on social, if you see that people are responding a lot, then you know that that's going to be interesting. And then, on traditional media, that if it's being edited and published, that the editor found it interesting. So you look at these validated pieces of content, and over time, you're going to gain an understanding of what works. And hopefully that will then give you some insight as to how you yourself can then go out with those sorts of things by, to some extent, mimicking that behavior.
Right. So if somebody asks you for a resource, or if you're gifting somebody a book, a high school graduate or something, that you want to give them something meaningful in terms of style and precision, are you Strunk and White? Are you New York Times Manual of Style and Usage? What's your go-to?
Yeah, I mean, my mom gave me Strunk and White when I was young. She was into journalism. I never read it. I understand the tenets of it, but I never actually read it. I don't have a tome that I point to. For me, so I have no journalistic education. Like you said before, right? I did a BA in international studies, and I learned to be a journalist on the job at a newspaper. Never, so no, and even at that newspaper, I didn't get any kind of mentorship. I just figured it out, and that was by reading a ton and gravitating to people I enjoyed and found to be honest and interesting and insightful. And so what I would say is, but I will say what I did come to feel in terms of like writing style, I am much more of like a Strunk and White guy. Just go right to the point. Don't beat around the bush. Like I just did there. I just said two things that made it pretty much the same thing. That was not necessary to beat around the bush, right? I could have just said, get to the point.
Right.
Short sentences, long sentences can make you feel good about your linguistic and writing abilities, but they're not easy to read. That's just if you want to read that in fiction, great. But when you're writing for a broad audience and you're trying to communicate difficult ideas, just get quick thoughts out. A popular thing something that's been popular on LinkedIn is like short paragraphs. And I was resistant to that for a while. And I think sometimes it's a little bit abused, but
Well, you had a
yeah.
post that talked about that plus the clickbait first line with the
Yeah.
extra space.
Well, right. Cause it's like these sort of simplistic journalism stuff. It's like people writing posts like, this is how a post will start. And I looked over the edge of the chasm. It's like, this is not...
Or 7 lessons I learned about op-eds from having my son recently.
Yeah. I mean, and some of these things get engagement, right? But the question is, and this is something I do talk about on LinkedIn, sometimes it's like, what type of engagement are you looking for? Are you looking for a bunch of likes and you get this LinkedIn influencer badge? Or are you actually looking to put stuff out there that when someone wants to pay you money and do business with you, they will trust you? And I think people are totally shooting themselves in the foot with this by putting these clickbaity stuff up there that looks like it's written by someone who's in 8th grade and just learned what journalism was. It's not real inverted pyramid. It's not real storytelling. It's clickbait. And, we know that it works in terms of getting clicks, but clicks is not the goal in most cases.
Sure.
And unfortunately, also there are a lot of people peddling this on LinkedIn as a discipline who don't actually know how to write either, but are writing coaches. So
Right.
I'm not trying to bitch and moan here. I'm just saying that the important thing or the takeaway you should have is just try to think about when you're writing. Don't worry so much about the style or the exact way that it's gonna go with the break, and just think about, what are you building? Are you building something valuable? Are you building something you want to save? Are you building something you could put into a book someday? That's what you should be thinking about, because that in the long run is going to serve you way more than any kind of short-term gain.
Now, throughout this conversation, you use writing as the content creation channel or modality. And I look at your LinkedIn feed and everything is written posts. There's nothing with videos, nothing with images. Why have you made that election?
That's been mainly a capacity and sort of focus issue, which is like, I'm just trying to kind of nail down one thing at a time. I very much want to get into video because I think that I think I'm good at explaining things verbally, and I mean, people could debate whether they want to see my big beard on a video or not, but video is the format to communicate sort of verbal messages nowadays, and I really want to get more into that, and I also want to help people more with that, because the same principles apply. There's differences in terms of how it's exactly delivered, but just the importance of having something unique to say, and getting to the point and all of those things. Yeah, I think that the video is a great way to do that, and certain people just absorb video better than they absorb writing.
I think video is a little bit easier in a non-linear sort of way. You can jump around a video, particularly if you've got chapters in
Right.
there, easier than you can, even if you got bullet points and, H2 headlines and stuff throughout an article. Video seems easier to jump around.
I agree.
Before your son was born, I'm sure it disrupted your schedule. When did you do your best writing? Early morning, late at night? When?
Not a time, but more of a state of mind. If I found that when I'm stressed about other things, I just don't write as well. The creativity is dead, and I'm just kind of doing it rote. There was a period where I was really trying to write every day. I think that consistency is helpful. Excuse me, because it does help with sort of the perfectionism that can happen with a lot of people, where they want to, say the perfect thing. But I would say that for me, and I really wouldn't say this that necessarily applies to others, but just maybe some others. But for myself, it's more about being in a state of mind where I feel like I have a clean plate, and then I feel more expansive when I'm like that, and I can kind of indulge my creative side a little more.
And do you need that same mindset for effective editing, or can you edit when you're in a different mind space?
Less so, but it also depends on the type of editing. Like if we're not, just to kind of clarify, because I think that term editor can also be confusing. Like if we're talking about like line editing, like like this needs a period here, or we need to change this from a semicolon to a comma, like that's generally doesn't really get affected by stress that much, or having a loaded up mind. But I think that, yeah, when you're trying to think about like, well, are you telling this story well? Should we start from the beginning? Should we just blow this whole thing up? Should we, is it structured right? Did you answer the right questions? Those types of editing, which is very much like the type of editing I do now. Yeah, I think being a little less mentally burdened is very helpful. Yeah.
So obviously we got to talk about AI. It's easy using AI to produce lots of soulless content, but AI can also be great for suggesting ideas or angles to consider. How do you think that AI can be used most effectively in the kind of content you're typically working on?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple, like one thing I've seen a lot on, again, LinkedIn is there's sort of a blowback, and a lot of people saying don't use AI for posts. you're just blending in with everyone else. I agree with that. I don't think that it's effective for that when it comes to creative writing. I do think it's very effective for solving the blank page syndrome or whatever it's called, where, you really just don't want to start. I love it for that and use it for that. But I'm outlining thoroughly. I'm giving it everything it needs, right? All it's really doing is just quickly writing that up. And then I'm going in and I'm editing that draft, right? But just getting it into draft form, for me at least, is very helpful. It sort of bypasses the need for like an ugly draft, which is kind of like something that people like to do just to get out the ideas that they sort of refine. Right. So it's useful for that. I would say that the intellectual sparring partner I don't find is so effective. I know some people use it for that with like idea generation. I've tried it. I've gotten like a little bit of use out of that, but haven't found it hugely helpful. What I found the most use of is research. Now that research needs to be closely checked, but using AI to understand a little bit about a space that I don't understand and find things that I'm looking for can be, and I deal with a whole range of subjects that can be really helpful. And I think that I know other writers are using it for that too, but most writers, like people who do like any kind of elevated writing beyond just strict like composition of like or just strict like sort of regurgitation, everyone knows it can't write in an interesting creative way. It's just true. I this is for people who are in that space. I think people outside of that space are like freaking out for the writers, and they're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Nothing, at least now, because it does not write well. It's cliched. And it's actually, there are theories that it's going to get worse because it's just ingesting more and more of its own crap. So I actually don't worry that much about that. But I do think anyone who thinks that, oh, I don't want to use it at all, I think that's naive because it makes things faster. And if you treat it like a tool that improves your efficiency, great. That's how I try to look at it.
Can we get to the point where you create a custom GPT that does a first echelon editor's work, not only in terms of the grammatical and spelling check, but also the essence of a provocative idea that's well structured?
I think that I've experimented with this. I think that the genesis of the idea, no. I don't see that happening. I mean, sort of the whole idea of of uniqueness is that it has to kind of come from. No one really knows where it comes from, right? No one really knows where creativity comes from. It's some sort of mix of like something that's undescribable and invisible, and then prior knowledge. I don't see how AI could access that, and I have not seen it do that. In terms of putting a draft together, if you well outlined it, I think for like news reporting type stuff, it already is there. For op-eds and like opinion writing, I've not seen it even well structured do a good job. There's too much personality that needs to be in it. And when AI tries to mimic human personality, it's so bad at it. And it does it even worse than, even if you think you're a bad writer, you're going to do better because AI is so awkward and it's so cringy. And when it tries to get like, if you tell AI like, if it produces drafts and you go, oh, we'll make it a little more personal or make it sound a little less robotic and more like casual, it starts writing stuff like, what's up, bro? Let's go chill. And it's like, oh my gosh, no, stop. Like I'm pressing stop on the generation button before it even finishes because I'm so embarrassed. But yeah, no, I don't see it. I'm not an expert in this. Maybe it can get to that point. I don't understand how it good at this point.
Right. So what do you think is going to be the next major pivot in your business?
For me, I want to expand it and find people who are interested in this service, and then find ways to get not just me, but others able to help them. So, a lot of that is just on my own execution, but I have the groundwork in place for it. And I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm excited about the future of it.
Okay, so to that end, for folks that want to get in touch with you, obviously LinkedIn, and I'll drop your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. But what would you say is the best way for them to reach you and connect with you?
They can email me. My email is jake@getopinions.com. And they can go on the website, getopinion.com. There's a contact form there. And LinkedIn works well. But just reach out if you're interested.
Good. Okay, so wrap us up with a couple minutes of wisdom on why, and I may not say this right, you may want to answer a slightly different question, but I would say why opinion pieces are an important tool in the B2B toolkit, and what companies should understand about executing on those successfully.
I can't speak to B2B with any sort of authority over another industry. I mean, one could make the argument that B2C is more suited to op-ed writing because you're reaching more people. B2B outlets or B2B companies tend to gravitate to B2B news outlets. Those are more trade publications that focus on their industry. So I know that there are people in the sort of how to build a business world who would say that I don't do a good job of this, but I don't try to pitch it so hard. If you don't feel that it's important to build your reputation, okay. I mean, some companies really don't need it, I guess. But I think that what I have noticed, and again, I'm not an expert in reputation building, so I don't try to pretend to that. It's more of just I've just kind of seen this a lot, is that it's more about the individual. Especially with this type of thing, hiring a PR firm, that's more of a company thing. But if you want to really build yourself as someone who not just can ascend in your company, but in your industry or even beyond, that's where I think people see value in this, because they want to be able to go out there and be seen as someone who knows their stuff and is genuine and is relatable and likable and real. And I think that sometimes the company budget can pay for that because it helps the company. And if that's the case, then, and you do feel that desire to build up that, to be more public with your thoughts, and to be more present in conversations that are happening, it can be hugely beneficial to you. But you have to recognize that, just like when I take my car to the mechanic, I don't know if the mechanic is doing a good job. And I would need someone I trust to know that it's good. You can put a bunch of stuff out there onto social media, and even if it's getting good responses, you don't really know if it's doing for you what you want it to do, and you don't really know how it's coming across, and you don't really know if it's resonating. And I think that that's why working with someone to do this in a thoughtful and in a way that's thoughtful, but also appeals to a lot of people, it's valuable. Yeah.
Cool. Really interesting conversation, and I appreciated the fact that you pushed back that honesty, that kind of maybe a little bit of irreverence that you talked about. That's an important part of what you bring to a company. Clearly, that came through in this conversation as well. So, thank you for your time and for your expertise.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I mean, that's my brand, by the way. I didn't even disagree with you. I just disagreed so I could show how I disagree with people. No, I'm just kidding.
Perfect. All right, everyone watching and listening, thank you for joining Jake and me, and appreciate you giving us the gift of your time. Be sure, please, to share, to like, to drop a comment, and to subscribe. It's easy to tune in next time to the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.